Hi, I'm Tian. I'm from MetaPM, and we are starting at 1 o'clock. So we're tracking to start then. We'll just be a couple more minutes and just let everyone arrive and get settled in. So 2 minutes now. We'll start soon.
Hi everyone, it's Malcolm Pascoe. I'm also ready and I'll be starting when we have our start time at 1 o'clock.
Okay, hi everyone. For those of you who weren't in our webinar before, my name's Tian. I'm from MetaPM. Thank you for joining us today to discuss how to drive acceptance and adoption of change management. Now, I imagine that all of you are here because you have an interest in change management and really want to kind of understand how to implement change successfully. So, this webinar is going to be short and sweet because you know how busy everyone is at this time of year. Everyone's trying to wrap everything up before the holiday season. So, we're going to have about 30 minutes, and that includes some time allocated at the end to answer some questions. If you have any afterwards, though, like after the webinar concludes, please feel free to contact us on inquiries@metapm.com.au. So let's jump right into it. Let me introduce to you our resident change management guru at MetaPM. This is Malcolm Pascoe, the one and the only. He's been at MetaPM since 2016, helping many organizations implement change successfully as the change management capability lead. He's quite frankly a legend at MetaPM, so we're really happy that he could make the time today to come and speak with you guys. He's certified ProSci change management manager and organizational development specialist. And as you can see, he's worked with a huge variety of organizations where he's gained so many different experiences. And yeah, it's amazing. So over to you, Malcolm.
Thanks very much, Tian. I hope I'm more of a legend, not just a myth. Yeah, today we're really just going to go through what people may mean when they say change management and how to drive acceptance and adoption of change management within your environment. So one of the challenges that we've often got is when change people are asked for assistance or support for a change initiative, people have a different understanding of what they are asking for. So people may say, we need some change management support. As change professionals, we really need to understand what is it that you mean when you say change management. Depending on the function and the focus of the activity, you might find you're dealing with IT people who have a very specific definition of change management. They actually may be talking about ensuring IT changes are assessed, approved and implemented and reviewed in a controlled manner. This is more referring to change control, and is usually within a framework of things like ITIL or IT service management aspect of change management. If you're dealing with an organizational directive, it may be enterprise change management, where they're trying to understand how, as an organization, should we go about change management. So what standards, tools, or processes should we have that we can develop organizational capability and individual competency in applying change management to us in our context. If you're dealing with potentially HR folk, it could be organisational change management. So aligning the organisational culture and the actions of people with strategic objectives. This is typically more involved in cultural change initiatives, where you're looking actually to design the target future state of the organisation in terms of what are the aspects that are going to be the hallmarks of the culture and the way things are done inside the organisation and the way that they're portrayed outside the organisation. Or it could mean project change management, which is usually, as an organisation, we're going to implement this specific planned change, and we need to make sure there's acceptance and adoption of that change. So this is typically the work that occurs for system implementations, for changes to business processes, restructures. It could even be things like an accommodation move. But there is a specific thing that the organisation is going to do, and they want to make sure that this change is handled appropriately. And it's not just the implementation of a technical solution, but people are brought along for the journey, and the benefits of implementing that change are realised because the change has been accepted and adopted. So that's really going to be the focus of the next portion of the presentation, where we talk about this project change management, which is really trying to understand if the organisation is going to introduce this specific change to the way that we may go about our work, or something that's going to impact the processes we use or the systems that we use to do our jobs. We need to understand what's going to be different, what's going to stay the same, and what's required of me to get ready for the change and to work effectively after the change has occurred. So understanding that impact on people, you can really think of this falling in 4 different main areas. You've got systems. What are the systems that people use today that will change, and how will people work with systems after the change? That's typically if you're moving to a mobile workforce, you may be deploying mobile devices, you may be changing the nature of the systems that people use. With our processes, are there processes that are going to be replaced or changed by new processes? And how will those new processes be reinforced? With staffing, are the kinds of roles that we have in the organisation at the moment impacted by this change? And what is the level of understanding within those roles of what the change means? So when we look at what skills might be required during and after the change, we can understand how that skill development is going to be delivered. Are there things that we need to do prior to the change? Are there things that we need to reinforce as ongoing skill development for new entrants into the organisation? So thinking of a roadmap, if you like, that maps what a project management plan is typically going to go through, you can overlay what the change management life cycle is. So a project typically would go through, initiate, plan, execute, monitor and control, and then close out that project. Because projects by definition have a beginning and an end date, and then they hand over to business as usual. Change management that occurs that coincides with that life cycle and can be integrated into those activities are the things that the organisation needs to do to prepare for the change, manage the implementation of the change, and once the change has been put in place, reinforcing that through organisational systems, processes, rewards, recognition, all these kinds of things. So when preparing for the change, We need to understand the scale and the scope of the change that's being delivered and scan the environment to look at, is this organisation currently capable of delivering this kind of change? And what sort of plans would we need to create to build sponsorship and get support for this change to occur? So when we're managing the change, we understand the communications and engagement that's required, how training and support will be identified and delivered, and managing any resistance to the new way of working by looking at what the actual barriers are to acceptance and adoption of this change. So when we go to reinforce the new way of working, we can look at, well, what did we learn through the change process? What were the successes? Where were the lessons learned? And are people now compliant with the new solution? Has it been adopted? Or are there still pockets of resistance that need to be managed? So the way that MetaPM addresses this is through a 10-step project change management process. Now, this can be applied to any particular type of change that's being managed as a project. For the purposes of our discussion today, you could also apply this to the adoption of change management as a discipline or as an organisational requirement to build that into project delivery. So starting with assessing the need for change management based on how big the scale of the change is going to be. So you can do a diagnostic to see what is the level of impact of this change, and based on that high level understanding, you can then confirm the scope of what would be included in change management activities and the things that would be delivered by a change management work stream. As you're defining that, you can then work to define the change to a greater extent. You can define what is happening, how it's happening, who's involved, and who needs to get ready. And analysing the impact to understand the differences between different stakeholders. If they're going to be experiencing the change differently, you need to have an approach to deal with that impact that differentiates their needs. So when we're identifying and mapping stakeholders, we've not just got an understanding of the impact of those stakeholders, we can then look at those stakeholders to look at, well, what is their orientation to this change? Are they pro? Are they in favour? Are they against? And what level of influence and impact do they have on the way the change will be delivered? That will give us an understanding of how we can define success measures for those stakeholders and for the project. Success criteria and benefits realisation, typically in projects, there's a lot around understanding the benefits to the business that the project will deliver. We also need to define what are the benefits that change management will be delivering to the project, and defining those success measures will help go a long way towards that. And then you can set about developing your plans, understanding the success measures that you're trying to achieve. So developing communications and engagement plans, and developing training and support plans, and any other sort of plans needed to support business readiness, and assessing readiness along the way with baseline, an in-flight review, and a post-go live review of, is the organisation moving along their readiness for this change to be implemented and supported as business as usual. When the change has been implemented, having processes in place to reinforce the change. So in that, we really need to understand the fundamental work of change management is to drive acceptance and adoption of this change when we're talking about project change management. Because new technology or processes that no one uses delivers no value, creates no benefit for the organisation or for the project. So change management has to support employee adoption and usage for the change to deliver the intended results. So you can create the conditions for this change by looking at the factors that impact acceptance and adoption and how those factors are addressed. So if you have sponsorship and communications and engagement with management and staff, that will go a long way to driving acceptance and adoption of the change. The way that you provide that sponsorship and generate those communications is by having a structured change management approach, dedicated change management resources, and integrating your change management plan with the plans from project management. So if there are technical plans or timelines, needing to understand, does our change plan have to fit in with those technical milestones, or should those technical milestones be influenced by what we need to do from a change management perspective? And that's often a really robust discussion with project teams around what is the critical path for the project to incorporate the change management activities that need to be included. So measuring the success of your implementation, looking at what does success look like for this change? How will you know if the organisation is ready and able to deal with operating after the change and realising those benefits? How will you know that the change has been accepted and adopted? Is there some sort of way of seeing that this change has been accepted as business as usual? How will you know that people are capable and competent to operate in the new way of working, and that as workforce change occurs, new entrants will still be able to operate in the new way of working that's been delivered, not just those who've been through the change process. Looking at if the solution delivered by the change is being utilised and it's being used in a way that is intended, or people are compliant with the designed process, and the way that that change has been incorporated into standard operating procedures and sustained against workforce change. So looking at how operating in this new way of working will be recognised and rewarded, and the achievement of benefits from the change is celebrated and recognised. So fundamentally behind this is having a change management approach that's structured in a way that allows you to prepare, manage and reinforce change by making sure that stakeholders to that change feel informed, they're engaged with the process, and they're ready to operate in a new way of working delivered by the change. So to look at that is to understand these different dimensions of how you can implement change management in a project environment. Understanding what are the different types of change that may be required by the changes being delivered. So is it a change to systems or skills, structure, staffing, strategy, shared values and style? Now, this model is a McKinsey model, a 7S model. And it really can be used really to have high-level discussions at the beginning of a project to help define that change. What is it that we're doing? What is going to be changing? What is the current state and the future state against each of these 7 elements? You can look at how are you going to get people ready for change. This is the ProSci model of ADKAR, so awareness, desire, knowledge, ability and reinforcement, as a way of removing any barriers to acceptance and adoption. Importantly, this is a linear model, so you really have to work through building high awareness and then building high desire, and then leveraging off that to be able to launch knowledge and ability, building up that understanding on how to change and how to demonstrate that you're able to operate within that change. And reinforcement to sustain that change has to come through organizational business as usual type processes that are being adopted. You can look at what best practices in change management are visible to the project and generating those conditions for successful change. So having active and visible executive sponsorship, having dedicated change management resources, a structured change management approach, employee engagement and participation, frequent and open communication about the change and the need for change, and engagement and integration with project management. So the engagement and support from middle management will help drive the change effort through across the project. So starting out at a very high level, the question I often get is, well, what does this mean when we engage a change person, what is it that they would be doing? And it's really creating this roadmap for success. So preparing at the beginning of a project, you really try to define the change. What is it that we're doing and who's impacted? Who are the stakeholders to this? Not just from an end user perspective, but the people that need to support the implementation of the change. And agreeing on an approach and developing a success plan for that. Then you can go into managing a success plan and assessing readiness of the organisation to operate after the change. So that when you have implemented the change, you can then reinforce that through normal business routines. So typically there's a checklist of deliverables and activities that a change resource on a project would be responsible for delivering. The obvious ones are a stakeholder map, a change impact analysis, and providing some kind of change management approach and plan. And now that may also incorporate the communications and engagement plan, the training and support plan, but there's also a resistance management plan or a reinforcement plan that will come into play later. So that when you're managing the implementation of the change, the focus is around actually developing that communications material and collateral, supporting the training, development and delivery, and keeping an eye on the readiness of the organisation. Are we moving people along in their understanding of the change? So they've gone from being aware that it's coming, they want it to happen, they know how it's going to happen, and they know what they need to do to be ready to operate in the new world. So making sure that that readiness assessment is not just a one-off event. You may set a baseline, you may do one in flight, you may do one very close to the go live and even after go live of implementing a change. A resistance management plan may start to become more apparent when you see this readiness assessment of where are the pockets of resistance and what do we need to do about that. And so a reinforcement plan is really more like a handing over to business as usual activity. This is what you would need to do as an organisation to make sure this change stays in place. So the other thing that is really important for change people to understand is how to pitch the benefits of change management to either organisational layer of GMs or heads of department or senior executives that see it maybe just being a training and communications effort. You need to be able to understand what are the outcomes and the measurements of change management activity. So typically the outcomes from change management is moving people from being informed about a change, making them engaged with the change, having them ready to perform, and then performing in the way that we're expecting the benefits delivered from the project would enable. So we need to move people along from understanding the reasons for the change and the opportunity that it presents, and focusing attention on the most important factors of the change. Building in momentum and addressing fears can help build engagement and getting people to share information and remove barriers. This will help us reduce any risk of failure of the change and move us into having a plan for business readiness for the organisation. People are able to learn and apply the new skills that they need to operate in this new way of working. And so the time to effectiveness is reduced, and the new way of working has a longer lasting results. And that can stay in place because organisationally they have accepted and adopted this change as just the new way that they have to go about things. So our approach to change management is to make sure that organisations have skilled and experienced change management resources to assist them manage the people side of change. And so this is again back to that original definition of when we talk about project change management, we may bring in elements of organisational change management, we may support enterprise change management. It's not so involved in change control, but it certainly can be integrated into project management plans. And the way that we do that is initial consultation and impact analysis to understand the nature of the change, and developing an approach and a plan that will be appropriate to the change in the context of that organisation. We can then manage the implementation those change management plans, and help reinforce that change by developing success stories and lessons learned, and really look at developing resistance management and reinforcement plans so the change will stay in place beyond the life of the project. So that's really it from me. It's a very quick, fast download of our change management approach. Tian, I think we might see, are there any questions that have come through at the end of that?
Yes, so just quickly before we get to the questions, I'd just like to thank everyone and just quickly remind you that if there is something specific that you really want to dive a little bit deeper into, you can always contact us on inquiries@metapm.com.au. We offer a whole range of services, right from consulting right through to resourcing, and of course we do offer a change management course. So if you have any questions, any burning questions at all that you think might be better suited to chatting about over the phone, or we can go grab a coffee, please contact us. We're super happy. So yes, we did have a few questions come through, which is super exciting. So thank you for sending them through. The first one was from Boris. He wanted to know from you, Malcolm, if you had any advice on common success measures.
It's interesting. So there's common success measures usually on a project from a technical perspective, but I sometimes get a few blank stares when I start talking about success measures from a change management perspective, and that's really where I came up with the set of success measures that were sort of broad categories that project people and business people can understand at a very basic level. So understanding what does it mean if you are ready and able. So does it mean that things turn on and they work? Does it mean that someone is able to perform a process without assistance? Does it mean there's a reduction in service desk calls, or these more quantifiable things that maybe some of the drivers of the project? When it comes to things like how do you know that the solution is being utilized, or people are working in a way that's compliant with the solution, it really starts to spread out into, if you're introducing a new process, can you track if anybody is still using the old process? Or moving to a new system, are there people still using the old system? Now, some of these things may be, well, they've got no option to use the old system, but if you are, for example, rolling out a web version of an application versus a desktop version of an application, you can see if you're trying to drive people to the web version, what is the take-up still of the desktop version? And capability and competence is more around, do we know that there's no requests for training because people understand the process and they are able to operate in that new way? Or are we still getting error rates that could be fixed by a simple quick reference card? So it's really drilling down on organizationally, what are you using to track the underlying behavior or productivity of an individual that would indicate if your change management has been successful. So I hope that sort of helps, Boris.
Thank you, Malcolm. We had another one come in from Navin. He said there's so many frameworks and approaches available for change management execution. What would be your practical advice for a change manager to not use a cookie cutter solution, but to have the right dialogue with stakeholders and make the change management more customized?
Yeah, look, and this is a real challenge for change management people, because we do come from all walks of life and lots of different backgrounds, and some come from a technical background or a project background, some coming from a base of understanding around organizational development and psychology, and we all tend to have a particular lens when we think of, well, how should we implement a change management process? So I think there's an important distinction between the change management body of knowledge, which is really organizational theory, elements of applied psychology, everything from influence and persuasion to communication styles and methods, learning styles, all those things that form a backbone of a lot of organizational development theory, but then looking at what structured processes and methodologies are there that we can put that organizational development lens on top of. So something like the ProSci ADCAR method, I've used that in conjunction with Kotter's 8 steps. So I can explain to individuals, we're going to do this step in the process, which involves me doing this activity and producing this deliverable, because it's going to contribute to us creating a coalition of willing participants. And so by developing a stakeholder reference group or terms of reference for that group, I'm getting those people to buy in and have engagement and forming part of that coalition. There's no, I don't think there is one single change process that is, the be all and end all. I think really, taking the pieces that make sense from what you've been exposed to and applying that to an organizational context, you really need to be flexible enough to say there's not a template that I can give you that is your change plan. You need to understand the organizational context and then develop a plan that responds to that. Sorry if I'm talking a bit fast on that. I get a bit of steam and I sometimes get a bit carried away.
That's all good, Malcolm. I think we have time for one more. So how do I get project managers on board with starting change management earlier or doing change management at all? I think a lot of people have troubles with this.
Yeah, look, and that is again something I come up across quite frequently is I think there is a willingness of project managers and people who work in program management offices to incorporate change management into their projects. They know that it's contemporary practice, and they're willing to have that funded as part of their business case. What they don't really have as strong a handle on is, but what does that mean? How do I scope out change management as a resource? What is the expectation? Do I need someone 5 days a week? Do I need someone 1 day a week? And where is it in anywhere in between then? So what I would suggest is really starting with getting agreement that they need someone to help them scope out the scale of the change, and not so focused on developing their training and comms plan as the first activity, spending a focused effort around, let's do a scope and plan activity the same way they would expect to do scope and plan or requirements gathering for their technical solution, because they'll be used to and quite willing to do business requirements workshops for a technical solution. Having that same reciprocal type of meeting to say, let's talk about what does change management look like in this organization? How do you normally do things? What are your existing communications channels? How effective are they? And what is the scale of this change? What type of change are we talking about? Are people going to experience the change differently? And therefore, you would need a change resource to help you with this type of activity. And that's a more informed discussion with a project manager around what they need to include in their business case around budgeting for a change management resource.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Malcolm, and thank you to everyone who attended our webinar. We really, really appreciate it. And again, I can't stress that if you do think of any other questions, please contact us. We are more than happy to help you out and discuss anything that you might want to discuss. So thank you. You'll be hearing from me pretty shortly, just asking. I've got a really, really super short survey that I'll be sending through, and then around 3:30 you should receive the recording, but please be in touch if you do not receive it, and I'll ensure that it is sent to you as soon as possible. Thanks so much for your time, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.